Right, my bad point is a bit of a... I think it'll take a setup for this. People might not get what I mean by this. This reminds me, this major coming up. It's going to sound like a mad bomber when I say it, but sorry, it's a bad point. It has to be a bomber. This major coming up. Now I can see why Kassad revived that topic. This does feel a little bit like that IM Rio Major from 2022, where if you remember, one of the things a lot of us flamed was the top end of CS at the time looked a bit scuffed. And by the way, it was, because this is why I'm going to tie it to this major. The one downside for this major, look, I have positives. Like, for example, I'm very excited to see how Na'Vi does. They're so good, maybe they should win the major. This one would be legit, by the way. This could even give them an era. There's all lots of narrative aspects that I like. But here's what I hate. It's one thing if we get a circuit that is structured, which is how CS is now, a bit like League or Dota, where like you have your Worlds or your TI, and people are then going to obviously evaluate rosters after that, aren't they? They're going to go, right, we'll give them one last chance at the Major or TI or Worlds, and if you bomb that, then, or we don't win if we're supposed to be a favourite, then we consider, you know, do we need to make a change? Do we need to upgrade someone? Was this guy not working out? Is there a better player we can bring in? My problem is this. That makes perfect sense relative to where you are in the scene. So, for example, if you're the team that was like number 4 all the time and you never won any lands, and then you give one last chance at a major, you don't win. Obviously, you'll make player change because you want to be a top team, you want to win tournaments. But here's the very key way of framing it that I think is negative about this major. With the exception of Na'Vi, and spoiler, I think that's only because they've made every fucking final, and you'd be ludicrous to change the roster. Every other team that's a top team, as far as I know, there are legit rumours they will change players after this major. Now, spoiler, only one team can win the major. If it's really the case that essentially whoever wins just gets to not change players, and every other, like number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, if they all change players, the reason why that's a bomber is because that shows that actually this major can't be as strong as we would hope it would be. Because in other eras, if you have like a real top 5 that are all just cracked out rosters that are really good, then you understand if you don't win the major that, like, hey, that was just that one tournament. Maybe we are still the best. Maybe we'll win the next one. Maybe we'll come. Like, the idea, what that says to me is it's just because of the economics and the contract situations in the scene. Essentially, all those teams, except maybe the Na'Vi, would already have changed their players. Like, if you go look at, literally look at the entire top 5 guys. If you go look at Vitality, spoiler, there's a reason there's a million rumours about them getting torn every direction internally. People want in and out, and other people in and out, and that's it. That is a nightmare. That one right there. Even though to me, by the way, on paper, if I'm like playing Championship Manager football CS version, I'm sticking with that roster all the time. We talk about I can win every major for like 3 years, mate, if that works out. But they want to change. FaZe Clan's almost certainly going to change if they don't win. You just look at the roster results recently. G2, by the way, it's even implied. I think everyone's finally gotten on the same page with me. The whole reason why they've even done this weird snacks gamble and bring Mobs and made him an anchor is because this isn't the real G2 lineup. They know they're losing Nico and or Munacy, and they're going to rebuild around what they've got at that point. So they're almost doing a weird like hedge the roster so that you can pivot like essentially, I've said this before, I think Malbs will just become the new Nico. He'll just get put in an Nico spot, so he'll be getting to be the star player. So you go down the roster, it's like that for almost every team guy. Even Spirit, well, obviously everyone hates on Zontix all the time, or will they bring in a Perfecto or something, you know, VP's going to change. It's actually, no joke, you bring up the top 10, it's the other way around, except for like small teams like the Mongols. Who the fuck isn't going to change teams? So my issue is more just that I think it shows that it's sort of like, I don't think the teams themselves believe in these lineups. So I still think it can be a very good major. Like the actual race for the top 8's mega. But it's not like what I want. I want the major to be where it's like we actually have some of the all-time generational teams. And this isn't literally going to make or break your entire roster. Like if you're really good, you maybe win it and you prove you're awesome, or you don't and then you come back next time. But I think it's just a bit of a bummer for me when I feel like for me, I'm actually a very elitist in that sense. I want the top end of the scene to be really strong. I want them all to have rosters they believe in, that they can. Like my dream essentially would be that the top 5 teams all go to this major. They go, of course we're all winning it. Well, my team's winning it. No, mine is like I think half these teams know they're not, and it's more like, but if we did, maybe we stay together, which I think is a very negative mindset to enter a major with.
Yeah, I got to agree. I really feel like the major itself is the sort of conversation you normally have around a major is overshadowed by the rumor mill of who's going where, and like even like especially, you know, number 3 and number 4 in the world right now, like Vitality and Mal, is like, is Vitality going to drop Mezzi and pick up Yimfa, and like, you know, all of this, which is insane when you think that like Vitality should see themselves actually where like, okay, because like G2 ranked 2 at the moment, but like we all know that they're not the second best team in the world. So it feels like, you know, Vitality, you have a very good claim to say, oh, we're the second best side, or Mal can also make that argument. And it feels like we normally go in towards each and every major cycle and say, these are the top teams, and any of these can win it. But I feel like it's really hard at the moment where every single team is rumored to make changes that, like you said, they'd have no confidence in themselves. And I don't know whether that's actually sort of a little bit of an indictment of kind of how uncertain next year's circuit is. I mean, we still sort of don't know. Obviously, we've had these tournaments announced. There's going to be a hell of a lot of them, a lot of opportunities to kind of rank up through, but people just still feel really nervy. I even spoke to people kind of in a lot of these top teams, and they just kind of really have no idea how insane it's going to be. On paper, it looks so busy, but they don't know really what's going to happen. So I think a lot of teams are super uncertain, and hence because they're uncertain, they're trying to get like ahead of it, and then because of it, they're trying to get ahead of it. They're trying to make changes, or at least ideas of what the changes are going to be, before we've even had time to see what they're like towards the end of the year. Where in the past, it was always like, you finish your major cycle. I mean, granted, we used to have kind of tournaments after the major cycle, like Blast World Finals and whatever, but that's your period of when you make changes. You'd finish the big tournament of the year, the one that really matters, and then we go into kind of making these roster decisions. But now it's like, you know, the second the major finishes, most teams, I mean, I would say like most teams basically coming forward. I mean, you mentioned the Mongols, I think you're spot on, but like even then, you know, you go just past the Mongols, you got teams like Saw, for example.
Oh, sure.
They're making changes like 2 weeks before the RMI even fucking happens. Like, teams are panicking, and I think this is the big thing. I think you're spot on. I think a lot of teams are like really not focusing on what is the thing, because on the other side, the stupid thing about it is like you got teams like Vitality, for example, who are like apparently, you know, making these kind of decisions about whether Messi stays, and Maus are thinking that they might get gutted and all this. And then the second they win one tournament, they're like, oh, it's fine, guys, it's fine. But then, like, how long until that conversation comes up again for them? Or is this just going to be a constant rinse and repeat cycle of like, oh, okay, we've got to make a change. Actually, we've just won a real big S-tier tournament or a major or whatever. Let's stick together and see how long this goes. And then it's just like a rinse and repeat, rather than saying, right, I just believe in this 5. Like we've seen with Na'Vi, and I'm going to fix the stuff in the server or in the kind of the prac rooms and get this side on the same page, and not have them constantly. I'm sure, you know, if you're like Messi, for example, who like once a week has like a post saying, is he getting dropped for Yinfa? I'm sure it can't fucking help the confidence like at all. So yeah, I agree with you. I feel like it's kind of, for me, it feels like it's really overshadowed the major itself, where it's just talking about what's happening post major. And Falcons and G2 is the great example. When Nico going to Falcons, you got more people talking about that than saying like, can G2 actually even do anything to prove themselves as a 5? And you know, everyone's basically just given up on Snacks already, but have they given up on themselves? It feels super weird. Like a lot of dead rosters and a lot of teams who just feel dead on the inside, with like no expectations heading in towards this major, even though they really should be, because they're like, you know, a ranked top 10 side.
This is just the problem with having international English-speaking lineups for every top team now, because there's no loyalty anymore. There's, what's the point? Why would you even stick around? Like, you have no reason to connect yourself to an organization anymore, because it's not really your fellow countrymen. It's just who's going to pay you the most. And now that's why, I mean, the ever encroaching Falcons will swoop up or scoop up a couple of these top stars, gut these other lineups that are supposed to be tier 1 orgs, and it's just going to be this constant bidding for who is going to get the most expensive team, who's going where next. And I feel like if there was ever a reason to desire as an organization some sort of like national pride, you know, in a way, I kind of like the fact that Astralis is what they are as a Danish lineup, Big's what they are as a German team, because it just feels like they've just stuck to the project. You know, they stuck to the plan. They're staying with those groups. You know, we've gotten mad at K Serato and Tapson for not trying to find some success on an international team, but in a way, at least I know that they're stable. I know that they're probably not going anywhere, and I think that's enviable. That's an enviable position now as an organization, to know that there's loyalty that's baked into the fact that you're a national team. So for G2, FaZe, Maus, Na'Vi, Falcons, what have you, we always are just theory crafting who's going where next, who's going where. And that's why, in a lot of ways, this scene would also, again, they'd be progressed by just having open contracts, because then we can actually just watch the major, and then we don't have to theory craft this. I personally don't really know everybody on Maus's contract. I think a couple of them have been talked about actually before, but and HLTV has actually started to list what people's contracts are in general, but they're not, like, Yimpat's does not show on HLTV, for example. It doesn't say. And usually if they have the info, they're going to list it right there on their current team. They're going to say contract ends X date, as it has with, like, if you go to K Serato's page, I'm pretty sure it says it there. So it's just frustrating, because I can't just really, for whatever reason, it's like you can barely talk about the teams anymore in the state that they're in, and so frequently fans would rather hear, like, this is basically like every stream I do. It's like, dude, Vitality will lose one map, and then people be like, so who should they cut? It's like, can we just like, I mean, like, sure, that's like, it's the next step, and I understand that's where you want to go with it, but can we at least try to talk about the flaws in the CT side? Can we try to talk about what's going on in terms of the actual gameplay? And I mean, it is just like the lowest common denominator way to see the game is just like, what's coming next? What trade should they do? As opposed to actually doing the most bare minimum amount of analysis regarding their actual gameplay and saying, maybe they should just have a double op setup, or, like, I'm just throwing out a random example there. Like, maybe they should just change who's actually looking for the openers in that one. And it's like, that's, yeah. So I think, yeah, in a weird way, this major is lightly marred by that. And I just kind of hope that for the sake of what goes on in terms of narrative surrounding it, that we don't just get too wrapped up in those kinds of ideas and can appreciate what's actually before us, which is, for my money, I know you say this, like, a lot of teams are looking to upgrade and everything like that. I think a lot of these teams are playing really good CS. Like, I feel like I watch practically any team that's in the top 10, and I'm like, on a given day, they can really beat almost anybody else. I'm not saying that VP is likely to beat Navi on a given day, but, like, I wouldn't be surprised if I see VP take down G2. I feel like I'm gonna know exactly what's happening and why Snacks failed. But I think that's more fun for me than saying, okay, cut Snacks. It's like, no, I'd rather talk about why he sucks first, then cut him.
I also do low-key, even though, look, obviously for player agency reasons, I don't want this. I almost wish we could, like, force people to just play for a specific interval of time so that, like, even players can't think that way. Because that's the worst. Yeah. The worst example is Vitality, guys. The reason I always mention all these shows, that when I've looked into, like, my sources behind the scenes, like, look, specific moves that those leakers say might not always be true. Or if you don't know how they operate, it'll be stuff like two players maybe do want someone out and they want a specific player in. But that's very different from Vitality org ever agreeing to that move, or even contacting the player or the other org with a view to actually making our contract happen. So in a way, spiritually, it may be true that, like, some Vitality players want player X out and player Y in, but that's not the same as him ever actually doing it. If anything, the story there is more discontent from players with player X. That's actually more the headline. And the reason why, in a way, I wish we didn't ever get that info publicly. It's one thing behind the scenes, if you ask around, is because I actually do think, like you're saying, Maui, it kind of, like, ruins the game. Like, when you know that the Vitality that won IEM Club, by the way, the second they win that event, if I'm that team, I just get together like, boys, we can just win everything in this game. Like, shouldn't we have, like, an era? But you knowing that team already has tried that whole year to break apart and take people in and out, and that they, if they had their way, would never have gone with that lineup. It's a kind of a bummer, because I've just seen them play like some of the best CS of the year, and they look awesome. So in a weird way, I agree with you, Maui, but not just for fans, for players as well. I almost think it actually encourages a very childish way of thinking. That's almost like a bloody matchmaking game. Like, hey, kick the shit guy out of the stack. It's like, no, actually, can't we, like, figure out how to play with these players if they're, like, top players? And sometimes I almost feel like it's like necessity is a mother of invention. If you knew you were locked in, and by the way, I have heard it's like this with some of the G2 lineups. If you know you're locked in for the next year, you're not going to grumble in every interview and go, oh, well, it'll be different. You'll have to just get on with it and put your fucking nose to the grindstone and actually get good. And by the way, maybe you can figure out, like, a way to work with this player that you're having issues with, or hasn't been integrated into the team, or you're playing the wrong map for him, or whatever. I actually think it would just be a good thing for the scene. By the way, a little detail also on that whole thing of, like, people wanting to know contract info, but it always inevitably biting you in the arse. You can, the way I know that fans say they want that, but they don't because they're too childish and immature with how they deal with it, is I can actually tell you the instances where the big salary hasn't been publicised has almost only ever helped the player in question. So I'll give you an example, and we were all just at an event with Ents, so maybe some of these guys will know this. One of the things that was actually a detail that went missing, I actually did a Feed the Trolls about this recently with TechGo, where I actually revealed a bunch of this info, was when that Ents roster split apart, where the old players from Heroic went Nerds to Heroic and then the others went to Falcons, and obviously Saw went as coach to Heroic, but he didn't stay at Ents and coach them, and he didn't go to Falcons. One of the things I heard is because he just got a ridiculous contract. Like, I've heard for real, he is one of the highest paid coaches in the entire world of CS. But since as a fan, you don't know that, you haven't hated on Saw, have you? What you've done is you've looked at who he is in his career, and you've gone, well, fair enough, he came up on Ents. I'm sure it's not a giant org. Heroic's not the biggest org in the world. He's working with, like, some decent pieces. But if you knew the whole time, though, that he was like a top X coach in terms of money, you'd all do what people do in football, like Newcastle is, but they do it because they're young or idiots. In football, football, right? People do the thing, Maui, where they go, because you know there's some like outrageous football salaries in Europe. They'll take like an insane one. So I'll give you an example. You'd pick someone now who people criticise, like, I don't know, like Anthony for Man United or something. And what you do is you calculate based on his salary, like how much he makes per minute or something, Maui. So then when he plays shit for 10 minutes, you're like, hey, you just wasted like, $2 million. It's something ridiculous. It'd be like 200,000 or something. Like, you figure out some insane amount, like you just wasted 50k doing nothing. And that is the meme, but it's almost known it's a meme right now. Like, when you do that, people know, well, we all know everyone's salaries, and spoiler, you can, because you have everyone's salary, you can do it with anyone. You can pick any team, you can pick Chelsea, Everton, you can pick any team. There's going to be a player that's mega overpaid, that's not that good right now. The problem in CS is, when we only know the odd one, people over-scrutinise like that. Like, once you find out Esatag is price tag and makes, like, the fucking 4th highest salary in the world, or once you find out Zipnix is on the Astralis talent team, but he gets paid better than anyone in, like, fucking G2, that starts to get a bit bad, and unfortunately, that just becomes something that bangs them out. So, see more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, be a pleb and don't.